Just here to introduce Jamie Manson, who's come all the way from the States to talk to us, so we're very lucky. So for nearly 20 years, she's been a leader and advocate in the field of women's equality and reproductive rights in the Catholic Church and the public square. For 12 years, she was a columnist at the National Catholic Reporter, where she was the only openly lesbian journalist in the Catholic media in the world, and an often solitary voice for feminism, LGBTQ plus equality and reproductive freedom. You can imagine the time she's having in the States at the moment. Jamie's expertise in Catholicism and sexual ethics was first formed during her studies at Yale with her mentor, Margaret Farley. She edited and wrote the introduction to Changing the Questions, Explorations in Christian Ethics, a collection of writings by Margaret Farley. Jamie has contributed to many publications and has been featured in dozens of media outlets, including our own BBC, the LA Times and CNN. She is the recipient of the Sister Teresa Kane Women of Vision and Courage Award and was named a religious leader to watch in 2020 by the Centre for American Progress. I first met Jamie in Rome during the Jubilee for Women Priests. She was one of our inspirational panel of speakers at an event where we served the press with cocktails called Feminine Genius and Strawberries on the Cake, quoting Pope Francis on the subject of women. Since then, she has been part of many Ministry of Irritation activities in Rome, and I'm very happy to have played a small part in them. She and some of us here are off to Rome on Monday to irritate again. I feel very privileged to have Jamie as a sister campaigner and a friend. I'm sure Jamie's words will inspire us in the many ways as we continue to challenge the sin of misogyny in our church. Jamie.
Thank you, Pat. Hi, everybody on Zoom, and if you're watching this recording later, hello to you as well. Thank you so much for being with me. In the room, you can, I know you're looking there, you can look either way. We have a screen up. And so look at me, look at the screen, whatever you want to do. But I will do my best to also look into the camera here. But again, thank you all so very much for being here. I am honored that you would spend your Saturday with me. My plan is to speak around 30 minutes and then give plenty of time for a Q&A. This is always a hot topic, ordination, and especially in progressive communities. There are a lot of feelings and emotions around the issue, and I think because it's a very painful issue, especially if you're a woman called to the priesthood. And so there's an intensity about it. And so I welcome any questions you have. There's nothing is off the table for me. I have a very thick skin, and you have to in the States to talk about what I talk about and in this church. And so I welcome your questions, no matter how spicy they are. I do this work, all of the work I do, whether I'm working on women in the church or LGBTQ inclusion or reproductive rights. I do this work because when I was 14 years old, just 30 years ago, I felt a calling to the priesthood. I felt called to the priesthood on Holy Thursday. And I was about 14 years old. Actually, that's more, 33 years. I keep thinking I'm 44, I'm 47. I'm much older than I think. So it was 33 years ago, I was 14, and I was at Holy Thursday liturgy. And during the procession of the Eucharist, you all are very Catholic, and so you know that's a very special night liturgically. I felt an intense call to dedicate my life to the Eucharist. And that calling has really defined all of the work I've done for all of these years now. And it's caused me to do a lot of discernment, this calling. Because when I look back, I got called about the same time that my father left. My parents were divorced when I was 3, and I would see my father every other weekend, usually. And he left to go across country. He lost his job and he moved across country. And I didn't know it at the time, but I would not see him again. I only would see him one more time before he died 20 years later. And so I've had to do a discernment about, what is this calling to the priesthood? How much of this is psychology? How much of this is me wanting the big daddy, the big father, the meta father is the more meta father than the Catholic Church, to embrace me, to see me as worthy, to validate me. Because that is so much of what pushing and pushing and pushing for women's ordination feels like. It's looking for a certain validation, looking to see, can you see my gifts? Am I worthy? And I did a lot of that after my calling when I was 14. My mother, bless her, was very supportive of me. And she worked in the hospital, and one of her patients was the bishop one day. And I think she was doing an echocardiogram on him. And she said to the bishop, "My daughter is called to the priesthood." And, he took it well. She later found out that in our diocese, there was a vocations office. And she called them and she said, "My daughter has a calling, you have to meet her." And so I met with the vocations director of my diocese. I was 15 years old at this point. Told him my whole story, poured my heart out to him. And at the end he said, "I don't know what to tell you, you're a woman. You can't be a priest." But he gave me a magazine about all these different orders of women religious that I could send away little postcards to. So that was many, many years of struggle like that. Losing my father, he stopped being in touch with me, sort of fell off the face of the earth, not feeling worthy, not feeling welcome, not feeling that he saw me. And so much, I think, of my early days of pushing for priesthood was wanting the church to see me. And it's a very hard thing to detangle how much of it was this psychological thing and how much of it was a calling. Now, my life has happened as 30 years. God has always found a way for me to do this work, this strange ministry on the margins that I have done for women, for LGBTQ people, for pregnant people who want to have a family. So I have to believe there was something deeply authentic about that calling. But I tell that story just to invite, I know that it's a very fractious topic, ordination, because do we want to be in a church? Why do we want to be in this church? This sinful, clerical, all-male structure. What is the redeeming value of this? Why do we keep pushing for this? Should we just want to do house church and bag all of it? These are the questions, that I think we have to be in constant discernment about. So I share that discernment with you because that has been some of my discernment as well. How much of this pull of this movement has been my own personal brokenness and wound, and how much of it is for a much greater purpose. So for me, what I have realized is, a lot of people ask me why I'm a lesbian, I'm a reproductive rights advocate, I'm a woman called to the priesthood. What do I want to do with this church? Why do I want anything to do with this place? And what I always say is that I have good days and I have bad days. On my good days, I struggle for women's ordination, or these other issues, LGBTQ inclusion, all these other things. I struggle for these things because I do believe there is something good and beautiful and true about the Catholic tradition. I really do. I have seen Catholics do extraordinarily brave things. I believe, religion is supposed to give us a purpose, right? It's supposed to help us answer life's unanswerable questions. Why am I here? Where am I going? What happens when we die? Why do we suffer? All of those questions. And I have found that the Catholic sacramental tradition helps me get answers to those questions. It grounds my social justice tradition. So there's something very, to me, still meaningful and meaning-making about the Catholic tradition. There's something good and beautiful and true, and it's worth struggling over. Given all of the harm the church has done, that beauty is worth struggling for, I think. But then I have my bad days. And on my bad days, I bear in mind that the Roman Catholic Church is one of the most powerful political and global forces on the planet. The Catholic Church has almost member-level status at the United Nations, for example. They have extraordinary power to undermine the treaty negotiations. They have diplomatic relations with every country in the world. They are powerful. No other religious group has that kind of power. The Catholic Church is also the largest non-governmental provider of healthcare in the world. Meaning, if you're, 1 in 6 times when someone goes to the hospital or a clinic, they're at a Catholic healthcare facility. Meaning, if they go there, they will be denied basic care, basic reproductive care. They'll be denied contraceptives. They'll be denied abortion care. Even if the mother is dying on the table, they will be denied this care. Even if a family is desperately poor and cannot feed or educate the children they have, they will be denied the birth control pill, for example. Even if a woman is sexually assaulted and gets pregnant, she will be denied any kind of reproductive care. That is the Church's teaching. So imagine how many vulnerable people are affected by Catholic healthcare, right? The Church's teaching on women particularly has a global impact. It is reinforced throughout the world. This idea that the Church has that men and women cannot be equal. This is an enormously, enormously powerful teaching. And I want to explain a bit more why the Catholic Church teaches what it does about women. It's all about what they call gender complementarity. I'm sure you all know this, but it bears repeating. In the Catholic tradition, this was something really articulated by Pope John Paul II, there is a belief that men and women are designed by God physically for different purposes. So in the Catholic Church, biology is destiny, right? Men, because of the way in which their bodies are created, I don't want to get graphic, but yes, it's that part of men. Because of how their bodies are created, God is signaling to us through male genitalia, essentially, that men are meant to be leaders, they're meant to be authorities, they're meant to be the initiative takers. Women, because of the way in which our bodies are created, are meant to receive. We're meant to be servants, nurturers. We are meant to be mothers, both metaphorically and physically. John Paul II said the most essential vocation of a woman is motherhood. We are meant to be maternal in the world at all times. This idea, this what I will call a gender ideology of the Catholic Church, because they're always accusing progressives of being gender ideologists. They are the gender ideologists, in fact. This ideology is the basis for all of the Church's teachings on sexuality, from contraception to abortion to the anti-LGBTQ teachings. Even the teaching on sex abuse, and I'll talk about this a bit more, is impacted by this idea. Because what the Church is saying is that only men are capable of leadership. And God has signaled it to us. So for a woman to be a priest is to go against God's natural order as we know it. In the same way, to use contraception is to go against God's natural order, God's intention for sex, which is, of course, procreation. It's the reason you can't have same-sex relations, can't procreate. 2 women can't procreate, 2 men can't procreate. Therefore, you're going against God's natural order by being acting on your homosexual tendencies or inclinations, as the Church would put it. This is the basis, is this idea of gender. And so what I always like to remind folks is, until we can dismantle the Church's understanding of gender, its gender ideology, women will not see justice, LGBTQ people will not see justice, the teaching on contraception will not change, the teachings on abortion will not change. I'll say something quickly about abortion. I know I'm speaking mostly to English people who have, laws, very liberal laws around abortion that are not in jeopardy at the moment. But what gender ideology, church's gender ideology is saying is that women are not capable of making decisions, right? We are not capable of moral decision making. We don't have that power. Bear in mind, this is a church that does not ordain women. Therefore, the church believes women are not capable of that kind of autonomy, of independence, of making decisions. They do not think we're capable of being moral agents in the Catholic Church. And so that is really the crux of this whole issue about abortion, is that can women, and do women have the capacity to make that decision? The Catholic Church would say no. You know, that's why the Catholic Church has a theology of forced birth, essentially, that no matter the circumstances under which a woman is pregnant, whether it was by assault or whether her life is in danger because of the pregnancy, she must give birth. She must be forced to give birth. Why? Because it is a maternal, we are meant to be mothers, and that means we have to sacrifice even our own lives to live out what God has called us to, this natural order that God has called us to, which is to be mothers. And also, we're not capable of making those choices anyway. We're not those moral agents. So you see, this whole teaching that undergirds the ban on women's ordination impacts a lot more than women priests. It has so much more. The issue of women's ordination is about so much more than making women priests. It's about addressing this profound sexism in the church. I want to read something to you. My mentor, Margaret Farley, that you mentioned, Pat, I was going through her papers recently, and I found this incredible thing about what gender ideology does to women. It's so beautifully written. I can't do it justice, I just have to read it. She said, women have traditionally been thought to be inferior to men and essentially less full in being in comparison to men, so not even fully human beings. Whether Eve was thought to be derivative from Adam, or female infants only misbegotten males, teaching of Thomas Aquinas, or women subordinated to men as punishment for original sin, that's in Genesis, or whether women were thought to be essentially passive, not active, that's gender complementarity, emotional, not intellectual, destined to contribute to the human community through reproduction, not production. It was always the conclusion that women were secondary, derivative beings, and therefore destined to be followers, not leaders, helpers, not primary agents, responders, not initiators. I think it's one of the most beautiful articulations of the problem with gender complementarity I've ever seen. But this is what our church teaches. This is what it reinforces every day, that a woman cannot get up and say the Mass. It has profound consequences. My hero, Teresa Kane, said 10 years ago when we were at the WOW conference, she said, if women were ordained, it would change the world. She meant it, she was right. And I'll let you know why. I want to read you some statistics about what women go through in our world. Women who form half of the world's population, work 3/4 of the world's working hours, receive 1/10 of the world's salary, own 1% of the world's land, form 2/3 of illiterate adults, and together with their independent children, form 3/4 of the world's starving people. So that's what the state of women in our world. They're doing all of this work, and they're getting 1/10 of the salary, own 1% of the world's land, are 2/3 of the world's illiterate. Women are subject to domestic violence at home and are assaulted, prostituted, trafficked, and murdered by men to a disproportionate degree. Regarding education, employment, and other social goods, men have advantages by being born male. To point this out is not to make women a class of victims, but to underscore that statistics make it clear that women face profound, disproportionate suffering and harm because of their gender. There is no country yet on earth in which women and men are treated in an equal manner. This is really what Teresa was getting at, is that essentially women are suffering this way because of sexism, because their gender. There's a profound belief, and it's very hard to deprogram even in progressive societies, that women are not equal to men, that they are not capable of being equal to men. And that belief is reinforced, is really sanctioned by the church's teaching on gender complementarity. That's really what's happening. So if you could take the Catholic Church, with its extraordinary global power, its reach in every country in the world, its remarkably popular Pope, I mean, everyone loves Pope Francis, right? Imagine if that church said women are equal to men. What happens? What happens to societies? What happens to patriarchal culture? What kind of pressure does that put on the world and its systems and its patriarchal structures? If the church says this, remember, bearing in mind its extraordinary influence. But in fact, we have a church that says over and over and over again that women are not capable of being equal. Women are not capable of leadership. Women are not capable of authority. You know, and at its core is this whole teaching about ordination, is that women are not capable of doing these things and being these things. I want to talk quickly about patriarchy and about patriarchal structure. We talk all the time about, smashing the patriarchy, but I always think it's important to talk about what patriarchy is and define it. Patriarchy is any system in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. In a patriarchal structure, powerful men dominate women, children, nature, and other vulnerable men. Men are also victims of patriarchy. It's really important to remember that. Often one of the key ways that men predominate over women is by fixating and controlling their sexuality. That's why in the US, for example, there's this Republican Party, this right-wing movement is so desperate to take away abortion rights, to take away contraceptive access, to take away IVF, right? To take away all of these things. It's because it's a radical patriarchy that wants to control women and their fertility. This is a hallmark of patriarchy. And this is a system that's constantly being reinforced by our church. And so only when it breaks, only when we break this patriarchy, break this gender complementarity, are we going to have the justice that we all long for. That's why this push for ordination is so important. I want to say one thing very quickly also about sex abuse, is that sex abuse is also an issue of patriarchy, right? Because patriarchy means not only absolute control over women's bodies, but the absolute control over children's bodies. In a patriarchal structure, therefore, there is this belief among men that they have power over women and children's bodies for their gratification. It's hard to say, but it is true. And that is why when you look at what are the religious groups that have the biggest problem with child sex abuse? Catholic Church, Evangelical Church, Mormon Church, Jehovah's Witnesses. What is the common denominator here? All male power structure. All male power structure. That is not a coincidence. That is not an accident. This is what it means, because the men will take care of men in a patriarchal structure. They don't want accountability. Patriarchal structures make it incapable of having accountability. So even children are impacted by this radical patriarchy that we have in the church. I'll say one more thing, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions. I believe in the priesthood. This is a very, very old-fashioned thought of mine. But even with all I've been through in this church and continue to go through in this church, I believe in the priesthood. I believe it is still good. I believe it is still valuable, because people, I believe, need priests. They need ministers. People need someone to support and accompany them through the most joyful and painful times in their lives, whether it's marriage or birth of a child or death or suffering unto death. People need someone. They need a gifted person who's in touch with something greater than we are to accompany them. I really believe this strongly. And priesthood demands tremendous gifts and skills. It is one of the hardest jobs in the world. I was a pastoral associate in a Catholic parish for years. It is a hard job because people come to you very broken. They come in profound need. You have to be able to show up for them. You have to be able to speak well. You have to have charism. You have to move people. You also have to know how to do administration. You're leading a whole community of people and a building. Priesthood, I think, is still very necessary. I think it is. And I think that one of the worst things about the Catholic system is by having an all-male celibate clergy, we're not bringing our A-team in this church, right? Imagine any other institution or a company or something saying only male celibates can lead our organization, can lead our business, can lead this institution. What a small talent pool from which to choose, right? So much harm is done because the church refuses to see the enormous talent and the calling that God gives to all people, all genders. And so I do think it's valuable. I do think it's important. And I think we need to add women. It's a very unpopular opinion also to the priesthood. I have very unpopular opinions. But I think that women have got to be included. I think the idea that we have to wait for a renewed priesthood, we're going to wait forever for that. Because then we're going to be waiting on men to have a radical transformation of consciousness and then take risks and then be courageous. Oh, wait a long time. All right? Women need to be brought into the church now. Now. And I know what you're saying. Why should women be subjected to that? It's terrible. It's going to be miserable for them. Women are not fragile. Women are not fragile. This is a country you know well. When you were struggling for suffrage, Sylvia Pankhurst, the extraordinary lengths women went to get this vote, starving themselves, being in jail, horrendous conditions. Women are not fragile. We can handle it. We can handle this. We've got this. You know? But it's just every institution, whether it's medicine or law, all of these great professions, and priesthood is a profession, as I said, women just had to start. They just had to start and they had to transform. I don't think any woman that's brought into the Catholic Church as a deacon or a priest today would say, well, it's going to be easy. They're going to welcome me with open arms. We all know the hell that we're in for. But so strong is that calling to transform this institution that does have truth and beauty and meaning to convey. It is, for them, it will be worth it. I was reading an obituary yesterday. A very well-known brain surgeon in California died yesterday. And she was famous because not only because she was brilliant, but because she resigned from Stanford University Hospital. It's a very prestigious school and a very prestigious hospital. 3 decades ago, because she couldn't take the way the male surgeons were treating her. She couldn't take it anymore. She said, I can't do this. I mean, men were grabbing, doctors, while she's scrubbing in, they're grabbing her bum. You know, I mean, they're calling her sweetheart and dear, and she's just enduring all kinds of things, of degradations. So she resigned, and she wrote a huge letter, public letter, explaining why she resigned, that she couldn't take it anymore. And the outpouring she got from other women doctors was so profound, she actually went back to her job. And she said, this profession, it is hard and it is hell, but it's a lot better with me than without me. And I think that's really what needs to happen here. I will stop there because I'm at 30 minutes, as I promised. And I welcome questions online or wherever. I'm going to try to see. I think we'll just get them right here, right?
Can I just stop you 1 second, because you should be on the full screen.
Oh.
No, it's not you.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just thinking that you're not being recorded except in that little corner. That was anything that was worrying me. No,
we're still recording for
Recording?
Yeah, it's still recording, yeah.
But is it recording
happening?
Jamie in full screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he
Pin.
says it's all right, so.
But I'll try to pin.
And Catherine is chairing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Colette.
Just says that Don and I were at a meeting in Sheffield recently, and it was 30 years of Anglican women's ordination.
Yeah,
And they had people there who'd been ordained that long ago.
right.
But a lot of them were young women And loads of them, hundreds, it was lovely to see hundreds, wasn't it? It was wonderful. But a lot of them were in the first woman in their parish.
Yeah.
And they said the first 3 weeks, horrendous. And then it became normal. And I've been in that position myself, in a church where they hadn't had a woman in any authority position since 1927. And at the time, although I was 30, I looked 15. And the first time I was up on the platform, somebody said, they're sending us schoolgirls. But within a fortnight, it was normal. So when it happens, so quickly, it will become normal.
Wow.
You know. But on another thing, what do you think of the Roman Catholic women priest movement?
I just want to make sure before I answer that, can people hear the question, or would it help the people on Zoom that if I repeat it?
No, it's fine.
You can hear?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, great. What do I think of the
It
Roman
would be
Catholic?
helpful to repeat it because it was a bit blurred.
Okay, so
Thank you.
essentially the question is wonderful reflection about the Anglican Church and that women, there was a reunion from 30 years ago women who've been in for 30 years now.
The question.
Because it happened 30 years ago, and reflecting and saying it only took about a fortnight, maybe 3 weeks, for them to start to feel normal. So very hopeful reflection. And then the question is, what do I think about the Roman Catholic women priests? I have been journeying with the Roman Catholic women priests for a long time, 20-something years. I was at the ordination on the boat in the St. Lawrence River in 2005. I've been to ordination since. I've written about the Roman Catholic women priests. I am not a Roman Catholic woman priest myself. I have a lot of respect for the Roman Catholic women priests. I think that what's important to know, I think, in our movement, where the laborers are few, the longing is great, but the laborers are few. We can't play Catholic Church games of who's inside the church and who's outside the church. I think there is no wrong way to try to change the Catholic Church. And I learned this when I was in 2005 at the Women's Ordination Conference. It was in Ottawa. And then there was this ordination on the St. Lawrence Seaway right after. And there were women on that boat, I won't name them, who were very opposed to women's ordination. They were like, no way, this is you're just recreating a terrible, terrible model. This is harmful to women. This is wrong. But they were on the boat. They were still on the boat. Even though they disagreed with what the RCWP was doing, they were on that boat. And I said to one of them, what are you doing on this boat? You just gave a speech about how opposed you are to this. And they said, we have to support women. Any woman that is trying to change this church, it is a hellish job, it is a hellish thing to do. They need our support. I may not agree with their method, but I agree with what they're trying to do. They're showing great courage. And so I agree, that was very influential for me. And I agree, I think that has been proven to me time and time again. I don't think we have to hold back the spirit. If a woman feels called and wants to, undergo the tremendous risk of becoming an RCWP, she should. If she has the kind of support you need to do that, a community that will receive you, you're okay with getting excommunicated, you're okay with not making money off of this, it's a privilege, really, in many ways, to become an RCWP. And so I have just the most respect for them, because I don't think there's a wrong way or a right way to change the church. Sure.
Could somebody be monitoring Zoom, because we can't see everybody here? So if you
Rhiannon.
put a hand up on Zoom, if you could tell.
Thanks.
Rhiannon.
Thank you. I'm aware that Sue had a hand up as well, but I'll just say very quick. First of all, thank you hugely, Jamie. That was inspiring and interesting. So interesting. When you were speaking about men, I was thinking about the patriarchy harming men as well as women and children. You mentioned too. I was thinking about that poem "Bread and Roses," inspired by in support of women, the women's rights movement, which of course includes those memorable lines: "As we go marching, marching, we battle too for men." And then I was thinking about, you were speaking about the rector. You'll have picked this up probably in yesterday's news if you've had time, of the Catholic University, am I pronouncing it correctly, Louvain in Belgium, who gave a speech yesterday at which the Pope was in attendance. And I'm going to quote here from the rector: "Would the church not be a warmer community if there was a prominent place for women, including in priesthood?" And as you, Jamie, have suggested, the world, in fact, would be a warmer place. And you're right, men and children, male children too, are often victims of patriarchy. So yeah, I think we battle too for men. It's interesting, isn't it, that as far as we know, we haven't got, maybe we don't know conclusively, but it has been suggested that the Vatican News report has redacted those references to women at women's ordination. There's someone on this call who's a linguist, and he's trying to find out, as Jeffrey, in fact, if in fact it was a breach of the kind of global translator and interpreter code of ethics. We'll be on it. We'll be on the case if it is. But thank you very much for those references. I have 3 boys, and I was hugely appreciative because they're on a kind of atheist spectrum, but they're massively in support of what we're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Marching with us.
That's right. I think one of the things that's so important, when you talk about people trying to change the church, or it's a very prophetic thing to want to change the church. It requires reading the signs of the times, taking tremendous risk. It can also often be very lonely, this work. There's a lot of infighting, it's hard. So that's why I think it's so important to support our prophets. We have Martin Luther King Jr. in the US. He didn't rise out of a vacuum. He didn't come out of nowhere. Rosa Parks, who didn't want to, who refused to sit at the back of the bus, did not come out of nowhere. She didn't just decide one day to do that. They were both part of a much larger movement. There was tremendous support on the ground for them, and they were lifted up to do specific things for a much larger movement. So prophets always need our support. I just heard about what happened in Leuven yesterday, and I don't know who was refusing to translate, but I think this is so typical of the Catholic Church, where they want to protect us from information. There's this real funny thing that we have to be protected from information, as if we don't have access to it, as if we're in medieval times and people couldn't read. There is always this idea, and it's so absurd to me. But it shows the profound fear of women's power. There is such a profound fear of women's power, women's equality, women's authority in our church. It just scares the heck out of men because it's going to undermine the whole system. Undermines everything. If women become equal, then LGBTQ people become equal, then we have a much better, healthier sexual ethic in our church. Everything has to change, but most importantly, they lose power, and they don't want that.
It took us 2 seconds to find the transcript, so they obviously didn't do their job properly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
But still, the instinct is still there to protect people from information. It absolutely blows me away. I don't know, whatever with Pope Francis, but it's just, yeah.
You're muted, Gillian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I resonated with so much of that. I felt called to priesthood slightly older than you when I was about 15, and told that we couldn't have bunnies on the altar.
Wow.
I didn't even know what a bunny was at the time. I found out later. But one of the things I've heard recently is that the early church didn't have altars or sacrifice, so that was quite good to know from Thomas O'Loughlin. But also a priest who died now, who came to the first women's ordination conference in Dublin, an African priest from Uganda who came as the first Black priest to the women's ordination conference. He was a friend of mine, and he said, just get up and do it. Like you said, it becomes normal.
Yeah.
It's a question of whether we would then be stoned for getting up and doing it, but we have to just do it. This is why I do admire the RCWP, because I've 60 years I've been waiting, and I don't know that I've actually moved towards an ecumenical group, the Immaculate Heart community, because I can't stand what's gone on, and I realize it's ultimately quite damaging, but I do admire the way you fight, and I do admire those who stick with it. And so we're all working together in different ways, I think. And one of what reminded me also, I remember at Quo from the very early days when we used to protest, where one of our members used to wear nuts around her neck. That's the only symbol of ordination you're allowed to have. You need to have, as one of our very posh friends said, male genitalia, that's all that seems to matter. So this is absolutely rubbish, really. So we do have to fight in every direction. So thank you so much, Jamie. And I'll let Catherine speak now. Okay.
My pleasure, Sue. I'll just say very quickly, I think you have to go where you're fed, in terms of your
Yeah.
own spiritual nourishment and
Yeah,
health. There is never anything wrong with going to a different denomination or a small church community. No one should ever feel like they're not fighting hard enough by doing that.
Yeah.
They're not fighting the way this one's fighting, that one's fighting. You have to take care of yourself when you're in the struggle.
Yeah.
You have to go where you're being nourished. And so I'm glad you found a community.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jamie. And Catherine's in the same boat. Shall let her speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm coming a slightly different slant because one of the things that's always impressed me about your journalistic integrity was when we were in Ireland, in Dublin, for the Pope's visit, and you came and stood with us outside the Magdalen Laundries because you knew your journalism would make such a difference. And I spoke with you as one whose mother was forced to give a baby up for adoption in similar circumstances. And you said something along the lines of how we use the press is important. And one of the things I think we struggle with here, which you don't seem to struggle with having NCR in the States, is the number of times we try and get our voices heard. But apart from the tablet, that is quite hard. And I think with the synod, I think what we want to do, as well as following what you're doing, but try and get our own voices out there from the different groups we represent. And I just wonder, as somebody with a long history of doing that, any words of wisdom would be gratefully appreciated.
For how to get into the press specifically?
Yes, how to get our words out there.
Yeah, let me see. I mean, I think that the one helpful thing about the media is that they always will look for the other side when something is happening. They're always they need to be balanced in the journalism, and these are Catholics coming from a deep place of faith, of pain, of integrity, who need to be heard. I think especially because we represent the majority of Catholics. This to me is always the irony. We're seen as this fringe thing, right? But the fact is the majority of Catholics support women's ordination, support same-sex marriage, support contraceptives, 98% support contraceptives. And even in the US, where abortion is such a fraught issue, 63% of Catholics think abortion should be legal in almost cases. And so we actually, though we are treated as fringe, we actually are representing the majority of voices. And I think that's a really important thing, that's a narrative that we have to dismantle. That, it's just this fringe angry group that's going to do something radical, make noise, try to, say mean things about daddy, when in fact we are representing the majority. It just takes tremendous courage and strength and risk to do it. So thank you for remembering me in Dublin. That means so much. I knew your name, and now it made the connection.
Well, I first met you on that famous boat at Gananoque, and I was one who went to see what I thought of RCWP. And now, as Sue said, I'm leading the way as the first English woman to be an Immaculate Heart of Mary community. So thank you for your witness that day and again in Dublin.
My pleasure, absolutely. Gananoque, thank you. I couldn't think of the name. Very good.
I was there too.
Yeah. You were there too,
Yeah, we've got some questions. Can we have some questions in the room?
Yeah,
Please, so Mary Leslie.
Okay, I equate hierarchical structures as being the opposite of equal and being authoritarian and leading to infantilism rather than people each using their own charisms and being treated with respect to their charisms. And I see Catholic priesthood as, grabbing all those different charisms and claiming them to control them.
Right.
And that's my big problem with the whole priesthood.
Can I back that up? Because,
Yeah, please, Al.
when you were your brilliant summary of the duty of all Catholics to face up to the evil system that our church is, brilliant. But I was quite taken aback when you outlined your vision of priests, because it's really about priesthood of believers. And so it's been a while now. I've been called to sacramental ministry from very small, but actually I'm not a leader. I'm somebody who would function in a community. So for a while I was part of the Benedictine community and the person who is celebrating Mass is just part of the order of the community. They don't have any administrative power roles or anything of the sort. It's distributed among
Jamie, can you unmute your end again, please?
years. Women priests, to me, I find that very difficult.
Okay.
Because we all have gifts from God. So you can offer the sacraments, but there'll be other people in the community who are brilliant at administration, money, setting the program and all this. The charisms need to be spread out.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably didn't hear most of that because I got muted. The room got muted. It's hard for me to do justice to Mary and Olive's very brilliant questions. They're excellent questions. Essentially, they are saying that hierarchical structures are oppressive, and are not, need to be done away with, that there's no, it's about, people being, superior over the other, priests being superior over laity. And Olive was talking about how it needs to be much more of a community of believers, and that many people there are many gifts that people bring, whether it's sacramental or management gifts or liturgical gifts. And so they are challenging me very justifiably in my vision for priesthood about adding women to the church. So what I would say to that is on the question of hierarchy, I think that we have an excellent incarnation of what a Catholic hierarchical structure could look like in women religious, actually, in nuns. Particularly US nuns, where they have really developed their own hierarchical structures. They are still hierarchies, you can't get around it. There's still always a leader, there's a community president, there are people in leadership around that president. So there is still a structure and there is an order of power in those structures. And I think that what they would say is that's just necessary in order to function, to have some sort of leadership structure is essential to functioning. But they have really, what I love about women religious, their communities, is I think, in my opinion, it's the only structure in the world that was created by and for women. All other hierarchies were created by men. All other leadership structures, models were all created by men. And so this is this unique creation of women that I think we really need to look at much more closely about how a renewed church could look like that. We need to learn from them.
Can I just chip in? Because the women's religious communities have been saved from linking sacramental ministry to authoritarianism because they can't.
Right.
So actually, they've been saved that problem.
Yeah.
What we're stuck with in the present situation is like that.
Yeah.
You can't have any power, any authority until you can celebrate Mass.
Exactly.
And I really think that needs to be broken.
Yeah. So Olive is saying we need to break sacramental ministry from power, essentially. And I think the way to do that is to give everyone the capacity to be able to have sacramental ministry. If they feel called to that, they should be welcomed, and brought into the community. I think the problem with it is only celibate males are allowed sacramental ministry, and so I wonder, I don't know what would happen, but try to imagine what would happen if finally anyone of any gender can finally, or any, a sexual orientation can finally just do sacramental ministry. What does the church look like? How does power change? How do structures change? I think it would have to, things would have to change. But I think to me that is the problem, is that sacramental ministry, as you're saying, is tied to all kinds of power and all kinds of hierarchical power structures. And so, I think that's the issue. For me, the solution is giving anyone who feels called and is vetted, obviously, and has gone, done their trainings and all that. Because as I said, priesthood is a very big responsibility. Ministry is a huge responsibility. It's a lot of work. And I like what you're saying, all of that, we have to have multiple ways, I think, of being priests. Different priests are, can be talented at different things, and can you have a shared sort of communal leadership? So I hope that helps what I'm trying to say.
Gareth, would you, somebody else? And then we can go back to the.
I'll come over and they can see if I may.
Go for
Yes.
it, Gareth.
Hi, thank you so much for that, Jamie. On the other stuff about the gender ideology of the institutional church, do you think there is some movement? Because we have in recent years seen, particularly under Pope Francis, many women being appointed to quite senior roles in the Vatican. We've got Sister Natalie Burke effectively running the synodical process. There's all this call, even within the synodical process, to reflect further on the place of women in the church, even if he has ruled out the ordained roles at this stage. So do you think that there is progress, or is that institutional sexism just immovable?
Thank you, Gareth. The hard thing for me about Pope Francis is that he is still so attached to gender complementarity. He makes reference to it all the time. Even when he does this whole spiel about women, the church is women, the church is a woman, the church is female, all of this. I think for me, the struggle with Francis is like, when he talks about women, he's usually putting them below men or above men. He's idolizing women, he's putting them on pedestals. Look at Mary Magdalene, look at Miss. But he never can put women on equal footing. He just can't. It's got to be here or here. Women are better than men. No, we don't want to be better. We just want to be equal. And so I think with the appointments he's making, one interpretation of the appointments he's making is that he's trying to at least start some sort of movement to normalize women in some level of decision-making and authority, sort of just making a little crack, in the ceiling. Some people would say, we're being co-opted, that he's just like, okay, well, I'll give you this and I'll give you this, and then you don't complain anymore because I did this thing for you and I got a lot of heat for it. And so that's the thing. So he's not going to be the Pope, I think, that changes things because he's too attached to complementarity. When I was at NCR for 12 years, how many years of that was his pontificate? He came in 2013, is that right? Do I remember that right? Yeah. And I just was obsessed with, unhealthily obsessed with how much he was attached to complementarity. And I would constantly make the point, if he still believes this, none of you are getting justice. Because I see a lot of gay men think, oh, we're gonna get justice, we're getting this thing. Because gay men are still men, and they have a stake, in the power. They get to see themselves in power. They have much more skin in the game than women do. And so I think gay men think they're gonna have this big moment, of inclusion. And I'm like, guys, you're not getting anything until I get equality, You're not getting anything. Let's be honest. So I think that he's not the Pope that's gonna do it. I think there's good questions about what he's trying to do, giving women appointments. I was surprised about the Synod and how women have we have women there, they have voting power. So we'll see. And maybe the next Pope will be much more open to dismantling, but I don't know.
Is there anyone
on Zoom? We have a couple of questions in the physical room.
Kathy, do you want to say something?
Jamie, it's always a pleasure to hear you. And I just want to applaud you and all of Catholic Women's Ordination. Speaking from the perspective of, I think, one of two Roman Catholic women priests on this call, Moraga and myself, I love that you love us and that you support the idea of going where you're fed. Just a small anecdote, about a month ago, after our Sunday liturgy, I went out with a couple who would be, in their early 70s, one of whose children had gotten married last year and had just called them and told them, lives in Chicago, told them that they were separating. The parents were devastated. thinking they had failed their children, you know, to be able to, and so we went to literally out to a diner and sat for an hour or two. At the end of the meal, they said to me, you know, we're in our 70s. We've grown up in the Catholic Church. We've worshiped with you since the pandemic. And I just want to tell you, never has a priest done what you have done today. And so to the perspective around, there is great need to accompany, and there's a great need to build community, whether you're ordained or not, in the groups where you interact. And so, yes, we can witness in Rome, as the pictures behind me show. And that is good. But if that institution is not going to open their arms and welcome us, we can find other ways to be fed.
Absolutely.
And also eat in the process.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, I think God is calling women now, and those women who want to answer now should answer, because I know the extraordinary service you have done for so many families, so many families. So
And just in the interest of being really honest, there are some weekends where I'm like, why did I not realize this meant working weekends? Like, why?
It's true. It's hard work. It's hard
Yeah,
work.
it is hard work. Thank you.
Oh, it's good. Julia.
Amusing. I feel mine's a bit mundane and pedestrian after that lovely contribution just now, but I am often thinking how many people in the Catholic Church just realize how embedded Pope Francis is in these Petrine and Marianne principles, or I think they've started calling them dimensions or something now. Anyway, whatever, you know. I don't think a lot of people realize just how utterly embedded he is, and you've made it very clear the knock-on effect of that. You can't, you know, it's zilch if you're in that. And remember that one of the greatest exponents of this was that evil Balthazar bloke, and there's been 3 popes where he's the third of a chain who've been absolutely embedded in these Marianne and Petrine protocols, principles, dimensions, whatever they're calling them, and I don't know that people just realize just how much that is. I wonder if anybody put together, for instance, a list of remarks that he's made, which just show how embedded he is in this, because the one that really hit home to me is one of those ones he did when he was on a plane journey. And at that point, I took his photograph off the mantelpiece and put it in the loft. I thought, you're not coming down now. Made a lot of changes in my life since I've come out of the institutional church. And I until, you know, I sort of knew it in one way, but it hadn't hit home. Yeah. So he's up in the loft for now, anyway.
Julia, that was not mundane at all. It was amazing. It made my heart sing, because I collected all of the things he said about women, and I love that you're using the Marian and Petrine, which is its own kind of complementarity. That what I find so interesting about the Marian and the Petrine is that men are part of the Marian, lay men are part of the Marian. So men are being treated like women too. Now and then a man figures that out. It's like, they're treating us like women. Yes, yes, men who are not ordained are also part of the Marian. You know, so thank you. It's wonderful. Did I see? Okay.
Well, but you can Shall I sit in the chair?
Where's it on?
Well, yes, do.
Yeah, come on over.
Just so they can stagger along.
Take your time.
Thank you. Yeah, just 2 things quite briefly. When you were talking about women religious having leadership, in my experience, that they have been voted in by their communities, and I think that might be something that, you know, our parishes, you know, that sort of thing. But that was just my thought then. This morning, I and some other people were talking about how we were surprised in the 2 sessions we had in our diocese in each parish, how we were in small groups, and how many people in my parish actually had put women's ministry down on the sheets. And that was lovely.
But the other side of that is, well, I mean, I know some of those people, but clearly they might think that that's what they would like, but don't appear to be doing anything to help it happen. And I was really interested in what you said about, you know, if you have a calling, go ahead and do it. Don't wait till things are easier. So it's about how you manage between the two of those, that you perhaps have to wait till other people get passionate enough. And one of my thoughts is that in this country, in about 5 or maybe 10 years' time, there will be hardly any priests. So things will have to change whether people like it or not. And whether we wait for that or whether we just go ahead and do it. So those were my thoughts.
Thank you so much. It's excellent. Yeah, I think it's just so important that we not play into the hierarchical Catholic idea of who's in and who's out of the church, who's doing it the right way, who's doing it the wrong way. You know, if you feel called to wait, you should wait. If you're called to serve now, you should serve now. I really do think that there is no right way or wrong way to do this work. It's listening, it's having obedience to God and what God is calling you to. I think is the only thing that matters ultimately. But there's no reason to stay in a place of pain and frustration if you see an opportunity, or God calls you to an opportunity that you want to take, really. So there are many ways to answer God's call, I really think. And there's no shame in waiting as well. I know there are a lot of young women that are going to Mass now, and this is in the US, so they're going to Mass, they're still going to, you know, they go to school to become ministers at Boston College and Jesuit School of Theology and all of that. So there's no lack of young women who long to serve their church. That's why this crisis of young people I don't always buy into, because there's so many young women and men who are in training to do ministry right now. But I think that there's a certain older generation who doesn't like that young people are going to Mass and wanting to serve their church. And I say, why not? You know, let them go, let them explore, let them get educated, you know, let them have that experience of church, because it's so hard. There's no community for them. You know, young people today were born into a radically individualistic society. Young people in the West. It's part of why religions are collapsing, is because people want to be self-sufficient, don't think they need community. But for those young people that are, welcome their journey. Let them figure it out. Give them the space to discern. You know, and do all the same for yourself. There's no shame in which way you want to go about this, honestly.
So I think Gillian had one.
Gillian.
It was me, but I don't. No, it's Sue.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm coming back to you really, but just to say about the complementarity, I had a lot to do with South American men. I won't go into too many details, but I do know about the whole psyche of the South Americans, and they do put women on pedestals, and the complementarity is so deeply embedded in their culture that it's actually very different from a European experience. And it's very different from the oceanic experience. I just heard a webinar from New Zealand and Fiji. And the guy it was a priest who said this from New Zealand. He said, we are used to women leaders here. We have women in every prominent position. What is going on with the Vatican? So culture comes into this enormously as well, I think. There was another point of what I wanted to say, but I'm just very grateful for you to sort of encourage people to do whatever they can. I know what I want to say. Mary McAleish was on with Root and Branch at the beginning of our thing, and she said community is vital to people. So whichever way you can sustain that community, even if you can't. I mean, I go to my local Catholic church and I can't talk about things because people can't hear it. But you know, that's my community at the moment. And I just want also to say that we had a huge discernment process through Root and Branch about what people were said all over the country, all over these islands, and we produced a graphic showing that 96% of people wanted women priests, but that was not included in any of the bishops' submissions. So we're talking about massive suppression. So what happens next, I don't know. I mean, I think America's good for young people being involved in ministry. We don't have that here. We have a lot of African peace that nobody understands. So I don't know what will happen next, but we're in a different place. But culture comes into this a lot. And the Pope cannot be anything different. I don't know. It'd be nice to think he could be. But coming from that culture, it is very, he's full of complementarity, sadly. But thank you. I'll shut up now.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, he is Latin American, and there is an idealization of the mother, he talked often, if you remember, he talked about women being, feminism being machismo in skirts. One of my favorite of his first lines. And so there is an adulation of women, on putting women on a pedestal that does not help anything. And so much is informed by culture, I think. And we have, in the US, we also have African priests coming in as well. The young people I was talking about, they're going to ministry school, but then there's no work for them. Very often there's no jobs for them, unfortunately. They're working so hard to serve a church that it keeps pushing them and turning them away. So it's a very, very sad situation as well in the US. I just think we all have to have our journey and our process and our discernment and believe God is leading us where we need to be,
Jill,
Please, have a seat. In the questioner's chair.
I just wanted to look at a different side of what you're saying, is that you say you've got lots of young people in America. We don't have that here, that kind of culture. But if we've got these young men coming along, as we have them now, few and far between, and they're being trained for a priesthood, the priesthood that you were describing does not match the training that these young people, these young men are being given. So when we turn to them for support, comfort, their understanding of women's life, normal family life, is not there. And the nurturing side is being denied them. No one's telling them that they need to be nurturing as well, because in this patriarchal society, that the church that we have, women are the heart of the household. So there is no nurturing for men to do. So that these priests that are coming along they're not being taught to nurture. And I think that in this, as you call it, complementarity situation, then it's not even working the way it should for the people that we are in church. We are not receiving the care and the guidance in a way that we can understand. And I think that maybe that needs looking at, as well as less of a gender divide. That once we get women who are equal, then the gifts and the talents that we've been given become interchangeable.
That's right.
And at the moment, we don't have that.
We don't. You're bringing up such an important point, Jill. Thank you so much. A point that I missed about complementarity, which is one of the many problems of complementarity is it suggests that men cannot be maternal in any way, that they can't be nurturing, that they can't be serving, that they can't be loving, that they can't receive. And it suggests that women are not, in the same way it could suggest that women cannot lead, and cannot take initiative and all of these things. And so that is also part of the terrible deprivation of complementarity, is that it's just not true. It's just, the Catholic Church is supposed to take human experience as one of its sources of wisdom and the development of doctrine, and it refuses to do this. I can speak for myself. I never felt called to be a mother. I never wanted to be pregnant. I don't feel I have maternal instinct. It's just not my thing, Am I a good leader? Yeah, I'm pretty good at it. You know, I mean, this is it. You know, this is who I am. But I know men, many men, who are wonderful nurturers. You know, and that's the thing. That's the sadness of it, is that it completely erases the human experience, what we know to be true of women and of men. You know, and that deeply affects it. There is this strange, I don't know if this is just the American church or what, but there's this, you know, very hard right movement. It's dying down a bit, thank goodness. We had this group called Church Militant, and that seems to have been busted finally. But I remember when I was at the bishops' meeting in 2021, in the US bishops' meeting, we were protesting, and there were other protesters. I said, what the hell are they doing? Because I know who all the protesters are for our side. And they were shouting at the bishops to be real men. You're not real men. Be men, be real men. So there's this weird thing in the American church going on about being real men and that they're not real men. And this hyper masculinity thing that's happening. And so I'm afraid you're very right, Jill, is that these young men that are being trained are being told to shut down. The same way they're told to shut down their sexuality, they're being told to shut down any sort of feminine instinct like nurture or something like that, you know? And it's another terrible, you know, deprivation for the church and for its leadership. So thank you. Beautiful,
Can I
beautiful
just
point.
intervene briefly?
Yeah, please.
When the Anglican women came into church, they needed training, right? And they were told they had to wait 6 years as a deacon, what a man waits a year, but whatever. But that went past. But the training has changed so much simply because women are present.
Right.
They've had to change.
Yeah.
Women have babies. Women, you know, have husbands to look after. Of course, a man never has a wife to look after.
Right.
And so on. And it's really changed things.
Right.
And that's all I wanted to say.
No, thank you. Yeah, bringing up the point that in the Anglican Church, things did change as women got more and more integrated. And I appreciate that point very much. I remember I went to Yale Divinity School, so I was studying with women becoming priests. And they were becoming Episcopal priests, and some were becoming Anglican. I remember one of my Anglican friends said when she was pregnant, she was serving on the altar as a pregnant woman, and a few men wouldn't take communion from her because she was pregnant. And it was a real indictment about men and women being sexual, because obviously this idea this woman had had sex, you know, and it was like somehow, you know, it was very psychological. I'll just put it that way, you know, but she said in time that they finally did, but the first few weeks that she was noticeably pregnant, you know, they were afraid. And so there's so many dynamics and challenges that women will face and do face in ministry. But I do think the other point you're making that I think is very good, is, hang on, it just fell out of my head. I'm having a moment, hang on. Is that one of the problems with the Catholic priesthood is that I always say the Catholic Church is the most radical patriarchy in the world because its leaders are not only all men, they're men that don't have wives and don't have daughters. So there is no inroads in for women's experience, you know, or experience of family. You know, and so they're so cut off from women and women's experience. So.
Some of the Indian ones actually go to seminary at 7.
Wow.
We had one at in Bentley.
Yeah.
Colette, they're totally cut off.
Yeah. Come, hello.
Thanks so much, Jamie. I'm sorry I missed the first 10-15 minutes of your talk. I'll catch up with it, so I hope I'm not speaking to what you've already said. But I'm really kind of interested in your expose of complementarity, which agrees with a lot of what I see and have researched. Just a technical note on complementarity.
Please.
If you Google complementarity, what comes up is a whole load of examples from physics. The original use of the word came from the 1920s and Niels Bohr's experiments in trying to measure the wave-particle duality of light. Whoa. And what it actually means, rather the Vatican has changed the meaning, the popes have changed the meaning into masculinity or femininity as either or, but in physics, the word was originally used to describe the impossibility of measuring light as a wave or a particle at the same time. You can do one or the other. You can measure a particle, you can measure light waves. You can't do both together. And had they kept that meaning for masculinity and femininity, you can see masculinity, you can see femininity. But when you start to say the dividing line is here, you get problems. because there's actually this crossover. And to me, that tells me something about our non-binary God, who's created a world of all masculinity, all femininity, but not necessarily male or female. Genesis tells us male and female.
That's right.
And I think if we were to redeem complementarity to its true meaning, we'd start to look a little bit more about the maleness and femaleness in everything, God, ourselves, creation. And we'd have a wiser understanding, I think. So I love the word, it's about meaning. But the way it's been used by the papacy, I think, is unfair. And we keep it. It pops up so many places in the Catholic Church. And you've mentioned, well, the Marian principle, which, although it's about a woman and her example, we all follow. We all take part in the Marian principle. Complementarity at its best. And therefore we need to find out where the complementarity is in the Petrine principle. Which brings me to my question.
Wonderful.
Which we now have this synod with voting women for the first time, 2023. Should we rejoice or should we kind of despair? 11% of women in the room being given a vote. But if you can gaze into your crystal ball, what do you kind of see would be a good development from the synod for future gatherings of all the church? That's my question.
Crystal ball. Thank you for that about the physics. That was amazing. I have to look into that. I think that one thing I want to note about the women being in, having that vote, is that it was a real victory for progressive Catholics that I don't think we got our due for. You know, that was a couple of years of women from this community and other communities standing outside demanding that women get votes. The only reason that happened is because these marginal people, these fringe Catholic women, demanded it. So you saw change in the church in your lifetime. And I don't think we got a chance to really enjoy that moment. Is that that would not have happened if you weren't standing outside, getting arrested, getting detained, getting insulted, roughed up. You know, that was really a powerful thing, and it's extraordinary to me. And I don't think the radical women who did that have gotten their due. And so, with that in mind, I think that I don't know what's going to happen. Unfortunately, Francis showed his hands to Nora O'Donnell at CBS News when he said no. I was happy he was being honest. I mean, it was awful, but part of me was like, thank you, at least he's being honest. One of the things that's always driven me crazy about Francis is he always talks out of both sides of his mouth, because it's very Jesuitical is what they call it, because you sort of want to give people the sense that maybe there's something, maybe they have some power, but they've already made their decision. And so at least he was being honest there. But I think that, so for me, one thing that it opened up was that being prophetic in this church, being radical, taking risks, actually has impact. It actually does. We are being heard, even though they're very good at ignoring us, pretending that we don't exist. We're showing that they do hear us, and that pressure does work. I think I would caution also, I'm always very nervous about the diaconate issue, because I think that it's dangerous, because I think we can be co-opted. Women can get co-opted very easily with the diaconate. So I would caution, be careful, because it could be they may offer some sort of deaconess thing eventually that I think, until we have true ordination, I don't think we should settle. I think we have to be very uncompromising about this. And Anglican women were really strong about that. Episcopal women, but you're talking about Anglicans, so I'm looking at you. Anglican women, Episcopal women have been very clear, don't settle. You got to get the whole thing. And it's because I think they understand that, there's always a risk. Again, it's a very Jesuitical co-opting church we have right now. They'll give you one little thing and then you're supposed to be quiet and be satisfied with it. And so I think women must never, and the men who support us, must never ever be satisfied. I would say that. That's kind of all I have at the moment for the Synod, but I think we have changed it. We did change the church in a very quick amount of time, and we have to keep pushing.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you.
I'm sorry for anyone waiting, but due to the vagaries of our rail system, Jamie, because the lovely privatised railways have cancelled her train.
Yeah.
So she's got to get an earlier train, but we can carry on talking.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we can't have the benefit of Jamie's answers.
Can I just take one more and then?
Oh, well, I don't want you to miss.
Oh, it's okay. I have
all right,
just a couple of minutes.
You're in
yes. So I'll take this one last question. Go ahead.
Hello. I would like to make a comment.
Okay, we've got you.
I would like to make a comment about the diaconate first. A number of years ago, a Catholic deacon told me that the people in the pews, the congregations and the Sundays, don't like deacons. For the simple reason that what the people in the pews want from the church is a priest who can celebrate Sunday masses for them. And deacons can't do that. So they don't want deacons. Okay. So forget about the diaconate for women. The people in the pews don't want them anyway. Okay. What they want is a priest who can celebrate Sunday Mass.
Right. Right. Thank you.
All right. And we're desperately short of priests. You know, I mean, you know, I think this is the bottom line to the diaconate problem. People don't want them. They can't celebrate Sunday Mass. That's the first thing. My second point relates to the earlier discussion about complementarity. Because of my background in the nursing profession, I am aware, and I've also been told recently by a science student in the university, that young people are, should we say, are rejecting the church, Christian churches, because the churches have not brought themselves up to date with the current knowledge and research on medical sciences, pure sciences, and social sciences. Some of their theology and doctrines are based on what are now known to be total fallacies. They're wrong. They need to bring themselves totally up to date with today's knowledge. And the complementarity is also in part, is a small issue in that I've been told more than once that the original human embryo is in fact actually a female form, and some of them differentiate into males. So this whole complementarity thing is totally unscientific. Get rid of it. You're just making a fool of yourself to an educated younger generation. The churches, Catholic churches especially, but also some of the other churches, you know, it's not peculiar to us. They need to come totally up to date with modern knowledge and sciences. Otherwise, they're just wasting their time. They're just making a fool of themselves.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad I took that question.
Yeah,
that was really good. Yes, thank you, Maura.
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure. I would say, yeah, unfortunately, the church is supposed to be taking in human experience, and science is, we're supposed to have many sources for our development of doctrine in the Catholic Church. And the church has just thrown out science completely, particularly hasn't with astronomy. The Catholic, you know, the church has its own observatory. They're great about the stars. They weren't great with Galileo, but now they're better with the stars. But on this, they need to re-engage, because even, you know, gender binaries, and according to science, they don't exist. You know, 1 in 40,000 people is intersex. There are 8 different ways to be intersexual. So gender is much more complicated. If they embrace that, they have to let go of power. And that's the real challenge. That's why, but you're absolutely right. The number one reason kids fall away from the church is because of its teachings on sex and sexuality. Because it's just not consistent with their experience, you know, and people want authenticity. And young people also want to have, young people are used to having their own blogs, their own Facebook, like they're used to having a voice. And in the Catholic Church, they lose their voice and they lose their power. They don't understand that concept. And so there's so many reasons, but thank you, Maura. Thank you, Pat. This has been wonderful. I've had the best time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, can I just say thank you very much, but I don't want to go on at length because I'm worried about your
All right,
time.
thank you, Pat.
But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. And we'll carry on talking, shall we, guys?
Yes.
We've still got things to say.
Great.
And you've given us a lot to think. And I want everyone to write anything that they think in for the E-News next time. Then it can all go in and then we can share it with the wider world.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.